By teaching children emotional literacy, we are able to prepare them for the foundations of self-awareness. Today I'm going to share some of our favorite books that go over a specific emotion, teach the child what it means to be in that particular emotion, help them label it and understand what the emotion means, but also provide some positive coping mechanisms and solutions that start enforcing positive behaviors around that particular feeling. Anger is one of those emotions that I think we have a bit of an aversion toward. When I say we have an aversion towards it, is that when anger comes up, automatically we think, oh, we need to get rid of it. Anger is bad. One of the things that I'm learning is that anger is actually a secondary emotion. So what that means is that anger usually is the aftermath of an underlying emotion that we feel before that. So usually things such as frustration, embarrassment, sadness come before we start feeling angry. So this brings me to our first book, which is When Sophie Gets Really, Really Angry. This story ends up opening, showing children that usually there's something that happens that causes us to get angry. So in the occurrence of Sophie here, she gets her gorilla taken away, and on top of it, she trips over one of her trucks. This is a way to show a child how there's multiple things that sometimes happen that drive towards the emotion of anger. So the story continues to say how Sophie is getting incredibly angry. So this brings me to the second point, how anger is actually something that is there to let us know, and it serves the purpose that when we feel angry, it just means that something is out of sync, that something is not right. Anger is actually the opposite of fear. So whereas fear, we sort of retract and we cower and we hide, anger is actually a high energy emotion where we really feel it in our body. And that is exactly what this story starts to introduce. Is it talks about how Sophie is getting really heated about the situation. It's using a lot of color red, and it even talks about how, you know, she's beginning to roar and she's getting really hot. It's like a volcano. And so this is a really great way to start teaching children and recognizing what happens to our body and how the feeling of anger is felt within us. So the reason this is a really fantastic way to express to children about the feeling of anger and how we feel it in our body, and through this sort of visceral and visual way, as children begin to learn about anger, and even us as adults, I know this is something that I'm personally learning about, is when we are able to notice what's happening within our body. So for instance, we're starting to get really hot and heated and agitated, and we can feel anger is coming on. That is a time where if we have self-awareness and we're able to tune into what's happening in our body, we are able to step in and perhaps remove ourselves out of a situation. Like, I need a timeout right now, I'm starting to get really angry. Ideally, this is something that we want to teach to children, and I think this book does a really fantastic way to start talking about how we feel anger so we can start noticing it in our body and to be able to intervene through self-regulation and self-control before it gets out of hand. So one of the other things that I've learned from child psychologists and behaviorologists is that when we have the emotion of anger, we have sort of two paths. We have a constructive path, so we can adopt positive behaviors as a way to deal with the emotion, and we have negative. So negative ones might be using violent tactics as a way to retaliate, to smash things, to punch things, and things that might cause damage to property or to others that actually escalates the situation. Or there's the other path, which is being able to actively use the energy that we feel when we feel angry and be able to tame it down and get ourselves into a calm state so we can deal with the situation. So what I love about this story about Sophie is that she does exactly that. So she gets very angry, she gets very heated, and she actually runs out the door. So this is a constructive way for her to be able to exert the energy that she is feeling. So one of the recommendations, and this is really for anybody, is if we feel angry, you know, we hear a lot about maybe you need to step away from the situation, go for a brisk walk, or maybe go for a run, get out into nature, get outside of the space that you're in, as a way to be able to release that energy. And that's exactly what this book introduces. So Sophie runs out into the woods and she is getting that energy out of her body. And then it also shows that she is crying. So crying is another way to be able to release that energy. And this book introduces that the fact about crying or you're angry is actually something that is completely normal and acceptable, as a way for us to be able to deal with that emotion. The other coping mechanism that this book is also introducing is the idea of nature. Sophie obviously lives somewhere really near the woods, and she lives in a very safe world where running into the woods is seen as a very safe thing. And I'm kind of making a joke because I think a lot of us would be a little freaked out if our child ran out of the house and into the woods. But let's pretend the idea here is that she runs off into the woods and she is in nature and she sort of observes what's going around her, and she's inspired by the plants. She sees one of her favorite trees and then she climbs up a tree and begins to calm down. So it talks about that she feels the breeze blow her hair, she watches the water and the waves. So this is another way of introducing something calming. So paying attention to our environment and using nature as a way to calm the body down and be able to tune into what's really truly going on within ourselves. So I really love this book. I think it has 3 really fantastic facets of why it makes it great. Number 1, it helps to introduce the child that usually when it comes to anger, there's something that precedes it. And so we can tune into that. 2 is showing a child how anger is felt through the body, and it's something that we can start becoming more self-aware about. And 3, positive coping mechanisms, such as moving the body, getting out in nature, and being able to calm ourselves down before we come back to the situation and are able to reenact with what was happening prior to that. That's a really fantastic book and I highly recommend it. I know that my son at the moment, he's almost 2 years old. It is a beautifully visualized, super colorful book, and I'm not 100% sure that he understands all the concepts of what the book is trying to tell him. But I definitely know that the beautiful visuals within the story is something that he constantly gravitates. Out of all the books that we have here, which I'll be sharing along the way, the Sophie Anchor book is the one that he keeps on asking us to read to him again and again and again. So it is something that I know is really popular in our household, and hence why I wanted to share with it with you. So the second book that I have is Don't Rant and Rave on a Wednesday, and this is a really great book. It's less of a storybook of introducing a story and much more of a visual anger management guide for children. And I have a couple of stickies in here because I marked some pages and really specific things that are really fantastic in this book that I wanted to share with you. So the first cool thing that's in this book is it gives children a very good description of, let's take these out, of the description of what anger is and how it feels in the body. So it says anger is the upset feeling we have when we become very annoyed or really mad. And then it says anger affects our thinking, it excites our emotions, and makes our muscles become tense. So once again, it's introducing that concept of what does anger feel like in our body? How do we feel it? So this book also has descriptions of what contributes towards us getting angry, what are some of the situations that precede the feeling of anger. So the idea is when somebody calls you a bad name, somebody pushes you, somebody breaks your toy. Once again, really introducing those very relevant things that come up in real life, on the playground, within daycare, and at home, as a way to be able to talk about them. Is, you know, when these things happen is when we get angry. Another really great thing that this book introduces is the concept how different people process anger in a different way, and so it starts introducing some of the more negative ways that we might process anger and what it does to us. So it's the concept how some people, when they feel angry, actually hide their emotions. And then what happens is when we bottle up our emotions, the really intense feelings of anger, and we don't process it appropriately, this is obviously in a very simplistic way for children to understand, is that we actually start becoming ill. So if any of you practice meditation or any sort of energy work, you might be very familiar with the concept. A lot of people talk about how our body ends up becoming toxic and taxed with us bottling up our emotions. And so a lot of people talk about when they start meditating, when they start doing much more of that healing energy work, a lot of these emotions start rising out of their body and they feel much better, they have much more clarity, they have higher energy. And so what I love about this book is it basically talks about is when we hide our emotions and we keep them up inside and bottle them, they actually have negative consequences towards our health. Another thing this book does is talk about how anger is neither good and neither bad. What it basically talks about is, it says some people think anger is bad, but that is not true. Anger is a feeling, and feelings are neither good or bad. And then it continues to say is, it is how you behave when you feel angry that can be either good or bad. So I love that this book starts to make that distinction for children, that feeling angry is just part of nature, it is part of being a human. But we have options. When we do things that are destructive because we feel angry, so smashing things, saying hurtful and mean things to other people, or being violent or whatnot, that is a behavior that is caused by anger, and that is destructive. There's one section in this book that I actually found kind of comical. So in here it's basically saying, it's trying to introduce the idea of negative behaviors to children and how some of them are not socially acceptable. So it talks about how we wouldn't think it was funny if we saw the President of the United States on national television and he was jumping up and down and yelling and screaming and beating his fists against a podium. So this book was written in 1994. It's almost 2020 and we're entering an election year. And as I was reading this, I was kind of laughing to myself because if you watch any of the political debates, hate to say it, but we actually are seeing a lot of these displays of emotion actually happening on national television. And it kind of got me to thinking how much politics has changed. I wonder if 1994, that was not the case. Were people more composed? I don't know, but I thought that was a little bit kind of funny. Okay, moving on. This book also introduces really fantastic coping mechanisms. So one of them is about counting to 10. And there is another one in here around how to utilize that extra energy. So maybe you want to tidy up and clean. That's a really fantastic one. I know I could definitely use that extra help in my household. And I thought this was really interesting, and something new to me and something that I learned actually from this book. And it says that hitting a punching bag or playing football or doing other violent activities may not reduce your anger, and that violent activities can often increase your level of anger. And I kind of agree with this. As I'm thinking about my own son, and he's 2 years old, I know that we've heard in the past, like, if you're angry, you know, punch a pillow or punch your favorite stuffed animal. But there's something to me that feels kind of wrong about that. I feel like there's other ways to be able to move that energy out of the body that doesn't require violence. And I love the fact that the book brings this up. So that's it for this book. It's a really great book. There's a lot more in here. It's not super thick, but there's quite a lot of content that this book covers, everything from what it means to be angry all the way to really positive coping mechanisms. And I really like this book, and I think it's a great one. The next book that I have is called Words Are Not for Hurting, and it is a very, very simple book. How it talks about how we can utilize our words to do good, so make other people feel good, but then also our words sometimes are utilized to hurt people, that they actually can do damage and make people feel bad. And so that's exactly what this book introduces. It's a very simple story. But one thing that I thought was really fantastic is towards the end of here, even though it's a really simple story and it's a board book, it has simple tips for caregivers. And it introduces things such as what to do when, as a way to reinforce positive words for your child to use, and how to gently intervene when your child is using hurtful words. So like it gives an example of you could take your child aside and say, see how sad your friend is because you called him that name? You know how it feels to be sad too. Let's think of a way that you can help him feel better. You might add, words are not for hurting. So it's got some really great tips in here. Another one that I really liked is the idea of try the simple reminder of use your words. So it talks about when a child is feeling frustrated, and I'm definitely seeing this pattern with my own son who doesn't talk yet, but he uses a lot of verbal gestures. So it's gently prompting the child is, can you use your words to tell me what it is that you want or you want to express? And so that one was a really fantastic one. The importance of I'm sorry. So it's introducing the concept of, you know, we're humans, we mess up. Sometimes we say things we don't mean. And as we are going in the process of exercising how to control ourselves and self-regulate in a situation, if we make a mistake and, you know, we said something hurtful to somebody else, it's the idea of having the bravery to be able to go back up to that person and say, you know what, I'm really sorry. So that's a really great one. And then I love this one. Something that I'm really working on myself is just being patient. So I hope you enjoyed these books. These are our 3 favorite books in our household that we utilize as a way to introduce the concept of anger. One of the ways that we utilize these books is we actually mix them alongside other stories. In my house, we have a bunch of different books focused on emotions, and we usually around story time during the day and at nighttime we'll sprinkle in different books, because the idea with introducing emotions, as with anything, whether your child is learning new numbers and colors, it's really all about repetition. So having these books in your personal child's collection is a great way to start reinforcing some of these learnings and these concepts, as a way to start enforcing some of these more positive behaviors and knowledge around processing these feelings. Today we talked about anger. I'm going to do one about anxiety, worry, and a couple of other of the more challenging emotions that children face with. And so I'm creating a playlist on my channel that, should you want to save it to your own account for future references, you're able to do that. So go to my channel and check that out, and I will see you in the next video.